Hello, everyone. And guys, please say hello to us in the chat box. Let us know where you're coming from, where you're joining us from. And for people who don't know me, my name's Glenn McIntosh. I'm the clinical director at Weight Management Psychology. And I'm really pleased to welcome all of you and welcome Dr. Tom Hannan to be doing a much anticipated webinar on understanding the relationship between neurodiversity and food. I think we've had about 450 people register for this webinar. So big warm welcome to everyone who's joining us now live tonight, and please do talk with us in the chat box. And also a big welcome to, we have had a lot of registrants who couldn't make it live, but are waiting on the recording so they can watch it in their own time. Always like to say hellos. We've got a big gang here. G'day Noelene, g'day Rachel, hello Ruth. We've got some people from Bundaberg and Radelaide, Ireland, Melbourne, Wales, Narangba, just outside Brisbane, all over Australia, and a few internationals to spice things up. I like it. So guys, by way of introduction to Dr. Tom, Tom is one of our wonderful psychologists at WMP. Our clients really love Tom, as I'm sure you'll get to see in tonight's webinar. He has a very warm, easy, relatable nature, which I'm sure you'll get to enjoy. Tom has a PhD in health psychology. So it's a very natural fit for us at Weight Management Psychology, who are supporting a lot of people with eating, physical activity, weight, body image, and general health concerns. And one of Tom's particular strengths, and one of the reasons we love having him on the team, is his really vast experience in the assessment and the support of neurodiverse clients. So just a little bit of context, and I think there are a few troops still pouring in, which is good. Over the last few years at Weight Management Psychology, we've come to understand the need to better support our neurodiverse clients. Based on the emerging research, we are learning more and more about the complex relationship that neurodivergent people can have with eating, physical activity, weight, body image, and health. And also, it's just something that we've been seeing more in the clinic. People coming in there have been on their own journey of exploring. Oh, maybe I suspect that I'm neurodivergent, or they've had a diagnosis and then they're coming to us for support. So we've really, over the last few years, tried to bolster up our support of our neurodiverse clients. And look, Tom has been vital in spearheading this, from helping to train us clinicians in peer supervision, as well as setting up our range of assessment and support offerings. So for that, I'm very grateful, and I know our clients are too. And look, Tom has a bit of background on how we got here to this webinar. Tom's been supporting our neurodivergent clients since the very beginning. But it's only recently, you might have seen in our emails and everything, that we have started offering assessment services. And there's been a huge interest around that, which is really heartening. And so we thought that this is really an area that our people want to know more about. And so we've decided to put on this little webinar where Tom can help you to understand a bit more about the relationship between neurodiversity and food. I will hand you over to Dr. Tom in a minute, but really he's going to share a PowerPoint presentation. I'll be there answering any questions I can and supporting in the chat box. but then taking notes on any particular questions or any themes that come through, and then we'll come together at the end and we'll have a Q&A. And look, I think the way that the best way for you to chat is through the chat box. And please, if we do like to see your lovely faces, and this is an absolute judgment-free zone, so if you feel brave and like turning your camera on, please do, and please talk with us in the chat box as we go. So look, this is going to be a really compassionate, very informative, and really empowering presentation. So I'm thankful for everyone who's here and watching in their own time, and I'll hand you over to Dr. Tom.
Thanks for that very warm welcome, Glenn. You always know how to make somebody feel special and welcomed, so it's very much appreciated. But yeah, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and obviously everybody's very keen to sort of talk about this topic, and it's something that, you know, I do have a very strong interest in. And yeah, as Glenn said, a lot of the work that I do is, you know, helping people really just discover their own sort of neurodiversity and sort of uncover what that means for them, and almost draw that relationship between neurodiversity and maybe some of the eating challenges they've been having throughout their life. And I think sometimes it's not always clear that, you know, that's sort of what's going on. And so yeah, I've been really enjoying the work in this area and helping people really uncover that relationship. So hopefully tonight or today, wherever you are in the world, you get some information and find this useful, and yeah, it helps you explore your own sort of dynamics and relationship with food. So what I'll do now, I'll just share my screen. Okay, I'm assuming everybody can see that one. Awesome. I'm just going to move my chat box. All right, so I guess I wanted to sort of start the presentation just talking generally about what neurodiversity is. And so when we talk about neurodiversity, really we're sort of just exploring and talking about some of the natural variations that we see in essentially human brain functioning and that cognitive style. So how we process the world and process sort of all the information that comes at us. And typically, I guess the most common sort of forms of neurodiversity we often talk about is autism, ADHD, but we also consider other areas of diversity such as dyslexia or dysgraphia, even things like sort of OCD. Really, we're just looking at where are those differences in brain functioning and the styles of processing of information that we see. And, you know, it's really developed over the sort of, you know, last even 5 sort of to 10 years of really focusing more on the differences in neurostyles and brain functioning, and trying to sort of move away from that deficit-based model. And this is something I do a lot in my practice, is working with people to just explore those differences and almost, you know, leaning into them to really figure out ways to help improve those areas that they're struggling in, without really sort of emphasizing or using some of that deficit-based language that we might typically see in sort of that medical model. And it so really fits into this neuro-affirming view of psychology, where essentially we look to just respect and validate some of these unique brain functionings and strengths that people present with. And as we'll sort of discuss tonight, really looking at where are those preferences in the context of food, and looking at that experience that neurodivergent people have managing day-to-day challenges in the context of food, but even in, you know, work and relationships and all of those different areas. And yeah, really just looking at that strength-based approach of figuring out what works well for somebody and building on from that and using that as a way to help overcome challenges in other areas of their life. So I guess, we are sort of here to talk about neurodiversity, and the presentation tonight will really sort of focus on autism and ADHD. So I thought I'd give a bit of a rundown on what we might typically see when working with an autistic or ADHD profile. And so with autism, it is a neurodevelopmental difference, and we do see these differences associated with a few different areas. So namely, first, we might see differences in that social interaction. So this might be, exploring how somebody engages in back and forth conversation. Is there a preference to engage in more solo sort of styles of interactions rather than that peer-based or group-based interactions? We look at differences in maintaining and forming relationships. So we might see neurodiverse people might struggle with initiating relationships in a neurotypical way and maintaining them. And so, working with people and neurodiverse folk on what does a relationship look like for them and what does it mean for them to have certain relationships, and using that to help, I guess, identify ways of finding that social connectedness. But then we can also see differences in social communication. So this is sort of that overlap between nonverbal forms of communication as well as verbal forms of communication. On more of the behavioral side of autism, we do also might also see differences in interests. So for people with an autistic profile, they're more likely to have really focused interests. And this might, look like somebody who's really into, let's say, a particular sport team. And for them, it's their way of processing all of the information in sort of their environment. And it sort of allows them to just really invest a lot of time and interest into one particular area. So they might just gather all this information on one particular thing, rather than having varied interests. We might also see differences in repetitive or ritualistic behaviors. And some of these behaviors we might see as being sort of forms of self-regulation. So this could be, I guess, a stereotypical repetitive behavior might be in young children. We might see some hand flapping, but this can also be more nuanced little behaviors. So in young girls, it could be sort of repetitively twirling their hair. There might be sort of actions they do with their clothes, chewing their clothes, for example. It's sort of a way of processing and releasing some sort of like emotion and self-regulation. We might also see preferences for routine. And so this might look like very intense preferences for routine and just really having everything in a particular way as a way of sort of controlling and helping to regulate any anxiety that might appear from changes to routine. And then we might also see sensory processing differences as well. Now, this might look like we might have hypo arousal or hyperarousal. So we might have somebody who gets really overstimulated by a particular sensory input, but we might also have somebody who actively seeks out particular senses. So they might engage in behaviors that really try and get more sensory input. So it can sort of go either way with the sensory processing differences. And I guess in terms of what we might look for with a diagnosis, we are sort of looking for all three of the social aspects. And then we would have sort of at least two of these four behavioral aspects to meet that criteria. And there are other criteria involved as well, but these are sort of the main behavioral and social ones that we would see. But I guess an important thing to keep in mind is that autistic traits do vary between individuals, and every autistic person's experience is going to be unique. And so the amount of difference that they have in one area is going to be different to how much difference another person has in that same area. And I have a little image here that I quite like. So on the left, we have, what we typically think of the autism spectrum of being less autistic to more autistic. But really, when we're looking at a neuro profile, we have all these different areas, and so we might have differences that are, much greater in one area than in others. And again, that's going to look very different for each person. And so part of the work that I would do is really explore this and try and get to know someone's neurotype to really understand their experience. And then if we look at ADHD, again, it's a neurodevelopmental difference in attention regulation, impulse control, and activity levels. So, it is believed to involve how the brain processes particular neurotransmitters, such as dopamine and norepinephrine, and the processing and the release of these neurotransmitters leads to those variations that we see often in the context of focus or motivation, but also things like planning can often be quite difficult for people with ADHD. So some common things we might see, we have differences in sustaining attention. So this might be really focusing on a particular task, might be quite challenging. But if it's a task that somebody's really interested in, we might actually see periods of hyper-focus. So they just really hone in on something and they find it really difficult to move their focus away from that activity. More from the impulsive side, we might see that preference for tasks that provide immediate stimulation. So we might see this in particular decision-making, but also in that behavioral and activity side of things as well. And then looking at those challenges that we might also see in completing tasks that involve organization or something that requires a lot of planning and that executive function, that can also be quite challenging for people with ADHD. And just to sum up the ADHD profiles that we might see, we have predominantly inattentive presentations, so somebody who mostly has difficulty with focus and attention. They could have a predominantly hyperactive or impulsive presentation, so their difficulties are more on the impulsive side. Or we can have a combined presentation where we actually see differences in both focus and attention, as well as that hyperactive and impulsive side of things. So I wanted to provide a bit of a, I guess, bit of context on how autism and ADHD differ, but also how they are similar. And so if we look on the left, we have sort of some characteristics that we see in autism. So this might be familiarity, they have a preference for familiarity and routine, difficulties reading social cues intuitively, differences in communication preferences, but also some of that self-soothing through repetitive behaviors and routine. With ADHD, there might be that novelty and new experience seeking, differences in attention and focus regulation, hyperactivity or impulsivity, inhibition difficulties, so struggling to inhibit some of those immediate impulses that we get. But there's also an experience of time blindness where somebody with ADHD might struggle to sort of conceptualize how much time a task is going to take, and they might just completely forget about it, or they just struggle to meet those deadlines that are placed on them. And then if we look at them side by side, we do actually see quite a lot of commonalities between autism and ADHD. So these might be emotion regulation differences, stimming, so some of those self-regulatory behaviors that we see in both autism and ADHD. They're both similar in that they're really focused on our nervous system. So there's a lot of sensory processing that's going on, and there can be a lot of nervous system overwhelm when the demands are sort of exceeding somebody's ability to cope. There's sensory differences in both autism and ADHD, though the process that underlies that is a little bit different. And then another thing we might also see that's quite common is task switching. So if we are really focused on a particular task and then we have to swap to a new task, it can often be quite difficult to either go back to that original task or even just transition away from that original one to begin with might be quite challenging. So how do these profiles relate to food? So if we're thinking of the autism and the autistic profile, or that autism lens, there's a couple of areas in which autism can really influence our relationship with food. So one of them that's quite common is with sensory sensitivities. So a big part of autism might be that there's particular sensory experiences that are actually quite challenging for somebody to deal with. So this might be particular textures of food, it could be the smell of food, or even just the look of particular food can actually be quite have quite a strong impact on somebody. And so naturally, if somebody does experience a lot of sensory issues with food, that can really impact the quality of food that they're having or the frequency of meals that they're eating. And so it might just influence, I guess, their overall general eating experience. Another area can be with that preference for routine. So a lot of autistic people do have a preference for predictability, as well as that preference for sameness. So oftentimes, food, a lot of the times, if it's homemade, it might not be made exactly the same every single time. So that can sometimes be a little bit more challenging for an autistic person to deal with. So I've worked with a lot of autistic kids, and so you might see a lot of kids who have a preference for the same packaged crackers or something that's commercially made where there isn't much variation, because for them that predictability and that sameness is actually really important for that regulation of their nervous system. So even in adulthood, we might see some of this preference for same foods or predictable foods as well. And then we might also see some food rules come into play as well. So these might be very particular rules we have about food or even just the eating schedule. So one common example might be that particular food items can't touch each other on a plate, or maybe a strong preference to only eat a certain colored food. Or it could be that we only have dessert after dinner, and that's a very strict rule for somebody. So again, these sort of almost rituals or preference for structure is actually a bit of a self-regulatory thing for autistic folk. And when we change that, or they experience changes to that, it can often be quite challenging for autistic people to handle. And naturally, that if there are some of these in play, we might then need to just make sure that that caloric intake is adequate, and that the nutrition is there as well. Now, in the context of ADHD, we do see some eating differences there. They're just slightly different, but they can also be equally challenging for people who are struggling with food. And I think if we look at it from, firstly from that dopamine and reward-seeking lens, there is generally sort of a tendency to engage in sort of dopamine-seeking behaviors. And we might see this often when there is almost an impulse to have food that provides that immediate satisfaction. So if there's a particular craving, for a lot of ADHD folk, inhibiting that craving can often be quite challenging because the brain is just looking for ways to get that immediate satisfaction and that immediate reward. So that's one struggle that ADHDers might experience. Similarly, in the context of binge eating, if there is an impulse to eat more than is typical for somebody, that ability to inhibit that impulse is often much harder to do for somebody with ADHD. And it also might require a bit more of that executive function. So, thinking about meal size and planning all of that ahead of time. That's often a little bit more challenging for somebody with ADHD. So we do sometimes see ADHDers struggle a little bit more with binge eating, and following those structured meal plans is also quite challenging. There's also a lot of forgetting. So a lot of ADHDers might go through periods where they just simply forget to eat. And there's sort of a bit of a reason for this that I'll talk about in a minute. But then often when, there's a period of forgetting to eat, there might be then that instance of, oh, I better well, not necessarily overeat, but a better start eating, and then trying to inhibit those impulses again can be quite challenging. So we might see a little bit more of a bit of a binge cycle going on due to that difficulties with remembering meals, but then also inhibiting some of those impulses as well. And then lastly, those executive function skills and planning. You know, often, organizing and thinking about what you're going to eat can actually be very taxing for somebody with ADHD. And so when there is a task that requires a lot of mental effort, naturally our brains go, I'm just going to go with what's easy, right? Because when we are fatigued physically, but also mentally, that's when our, old habits are more likely to come out. And we do go for things that are just going to be A, quick and easy, but also B, sort of satisfy whatever dysregulation is going on with us. And so this is where we might see that preference for low cognitive decisions, where it's much easier to order takeout than it is to go through that planning process of figuring out what to cook, getting the groceries, and then preparing the meal. Now, I wanted to provide just a little bit of context, I guess, for eating disorders. Now, these are sort of the common eating disorders that we might see in the context of neurodiversity. And looking at the neurodiversity population as a whole, they are much more likely to experience an eating disorder than the general population. And so if we look at, let's say, for example, ARFID, which is this avoidant or restrictive food intake, a lot of it is based on sensory preferences. And so there might be a sensory driven avoidance of certain foods, but there might also be certain fears of what might happen if they eat a particular food. So an example could be, I guess, firstly, the texture of certain foods might trigger a bit of a nervous system response, and a person might be very anxious or fearful of eating that food. But also if there's been negative experiences in the past, so if there's been maybe experiences of choking or vomiting, that can also produce a bit of an aversive reaction to food. And so in the context of autism, ARFID is a bit of a, I guess, risk factor. And we see a lot of autistic children struggle with ARFID because of that sensory regulation and that sensory preferences that are present. If we're looking at then anorexia nervosa, so this is characterized by restricted food intake, but also that intense fear of weight gain and body image concern. So again, here we might want to be mindful of, looking at some of those beliefs about body image and weight gain, but also having a look at those food-related routines and those preferences for food behaviors that might be present in an autistic person. Bulimia nervosa characterized by use of compensatory behaviors. So this might be like exercising or purging in other ways, like vomiting, to prevent that weight gain after binge eating. And I'll touch on binge eating disorder at the same time as well, because this is characterized by instances of eating large amounts of food in a short period of time. And bulimia nervosa and binge eating disorder, they are more common in people with ADHD because there is, I guess, that difficulty with inhibiting some of those impulses and then also inhibiting almost that impulse to stop eating once eating has begun. So these are sort of common conditions that we might see overlap with neurodiversity. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about some other neurodiverse challenges that often influence our relationship with food. And so one of them is what we call interoception. And interoception is essentially our ability to sense and identify some of our internal bodily states. So this might be recognizing when you're hungry or thirsty, recognizing when you're full, or even just recognizing when your body is tired. In a lot of neurodiverse folk, this ability is actually much more challenging. And so that ability to recognize, am I actually hungry or am I actually full, is a lot trickier to do for neurodiverse people. And so this naturally will influence somebody's eating behavior, because maybe they'll start eating, they don't recognize when they're full, so they might then overeat. But also, if they're forgetting to eat in the first place, they might not recognize that they are hungry. And so there might be sort of limited food intake throughout the day because of this, combined with maybe some executive function challenges as well. And then another common challenge associated with neurodiversity is what we call alexithymia. And alexithymia is that ability to identify and describe your emotional experience. And so if you are going through a time where maybe you're feeling like something's going on, for a lot of autistic folk, it's actually quite challenging to go, oh, that emotion is this, and describe what that emotion is. So that can bring about quite a bit of confusion of emotional experiences. And then we might interpret some of those signals as being hungry, for example. And so this might be then, if somebody's getting really bored, or they get home from work and they're very overstimulated, they might just feel a little bit irritable or frustrated. They might actually interpret that as being hunger. And so then they might snack more than they actually need to, because they're not actually hungry, but they're feeling something else going on. They just can't recognize what that is. So in terms of what we can, some different strategies that I would often explore with people who are experiencing eating differences and either self-identified neurodiverse, or they've met criteria. One of them can be looking at having predictable food routines, but I have in brackets there about staying flexible. Because if we think from the autism lens, having a general structure can be really useful for reducing some of that uncertainty around food and mealtime, and naturally then reducing some of that overwhelm that we might experience. But then from the ADHD lens, having structure by the means of visual cues or reminders or timers might actually help if you are struggling with distractibility, or you're forgetting meal times. So being flexible, though, will be important, because it just provides that little bit of wiggle room for when things don't go to plan. But exploring what a predictable food routine looks like for you can be a helpful way to help manage some of these eating differences you might be experiencing. I also like to just identify some of these executive function challenges that you might be experiencing. So for people with ADHD, having something that requires a lot of steps can often be really overwhelming. So this might be, if there's a lot of steps involved in just having groceries ready to prepare dinner, finding ways to break down that process to make it a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable, can help make that task feel a little bit less overwhelming. And this could even be, having some of those pre-prepared food options or pre-cut veg in the freezer, things that will, I guess, reduce that mental load of preparing food, but also that physical load as well of having to actively go out and buy groceries and then do a lot of that food prep. Honoring your food sensory preferences without judgment. I think this one is really important, especially if you are somebody who experiences a lot of, I guess, sensory overwhelm when it comes to food. It might be something that you've never actually explored. So even just identifying what those preferences are can be a really useful step forward in, making sure that your eating experience isn't anxiety provoking. Because if, let's say, for example, you do have particular safe foods, we can actually use some of those safe foods as a way of exploring new foods without that pressure of, forcing ourselves to try something new or to make sure that we're eating varied foods. So even just identifying what those food preferences are can really help just understand your profile in the context of eating. And then related to this is understanding your sensory profile more generally. So having you think about what are those environmental factors that are going to contribute to that sensory overwhelm that you might experience. So this could be, you know, if lighting is something that you do struggle with, having the kitchen set up or your eating environment set up in a way that isn't going to be super demanding on your nervous system. If there's particular songs you really enjoy or sounds that you really sort of get a lot of calming effects from, having those play in the background while you're cooking or eating can help regulate your nervous system. Um, and it can be important, I think, to do this before that eating routine begins. We sort of want to enter that routine in a bit of a calm space so that we're not potentially overthinking a lot of things and that anxiety doesn't just build. Trying to get your nervous system in a calm state before that eating routine is a really, really sort of important thing to do. Looking for some external supports to help with that interoception that I was talking about before. Now, this is, I'm sure many of you would have seen in the email that this is a worksheet that we're going to be sending out to everybody. It's a mind-body scan worksheet. And this is something that I use with a lot of the clients that I work with, particularly when we're just not feeling 100%, but we're not too sure what's going on. I'll share it maybe on the screen at the end, just so it doesn't interrupt the presentation. But it's a good way to really explore what is it that your body potentially is looking for at this moment that isn't going to lead to, I'm just going to eat something because I'm feeling a little bit, not the best. So I'll walk through this, a little bit later on, but it can be a good way to figure out what's going on for you and then discover what it is your body actually needs. Planning for low energy days. This can be really important when you have maybe gone through that process of discovering what are your sensory differences, what contributes to your nervous system sort of overwhelm. And if you can plan for those days, it can just make that meal routine or that eating routine just a little bit easier if you know there's things there that aren't going to be just additional demands placed on you. So this could be having sort of low energy required meal kits, having a shelf or a drawer that's got sort of preferred food choices there that are sort of ready to go, that don't require that additional physical but also mental effort as well. And then the last one I think is really important. It's just to practice some self-compassion, right? There's no right way to eat. And a lot of this is just exploring what are your food preferences and whatever differences that exist in sort of the context of eating. And I think a lot of that can involve a bit more of this intuitive eating style. And this is something that at WMP we all sort of really explore a lot with clients, is almost getting in tune with what your body needs and sort of listening to how your body is going to respond to certain food, certain food types, or, listening to those hunger and fullness cues. And I think this can be really important because when we do have really rigid food rules that we might be placing on ourselves because of external reasons, this might be, dieting or weight loss. When we break those rules, we oftentimes don't feel great because we break a rule that we've placed on ourselves. It might bring up a lot of challenging emotions, a bit of guilt or a bit of shame. And then a lot of the times, if we've used food as a comfort way, we might then sort of go back to food and go, okay, I'm just going to sort of comfort and help deal with these emotions through a way that I know best, and that could be with food. So yeah, I think shifting our mindset away from really strict food rules that aren't sort of self-regulation based, and really tuning into what our body needs and understanding our body a little bit better is a really important way to approach food. And I think, again, sort of also learning to identify and communicate your needs. So whether this is your sensory needs, your social needs, or your emotional needs, this can be really important as a way of firstly learning about yourself, but then also exploring ways to seek help, and also ways to sort of modify your environment so that you have that better relationship with food. And then knowing how to seek support as well is really, really important. And so if you are seeking help, what can that look like? So a lot of the work that we might do in sort of the therapeutic setting could be, really understanding your relationship with food. So whether historically you've used food as a way of coping with stress or anxiety, sometimes that can become a bit of a habitual response that we don't necessarily realize we're doing. So really just understanding in what context do we use food if it is to sort of influence our emotional state. Exploring your neurotype and your sensory profile. I think this is a really important step if you maybe have received a recent diagnosis and you don't have ongoing support. It can sometimes be this period of, what do I do now? And so I think a big part of that therapeutic journey is understanding, what does it mean for you to be neurodiverse? What does your neurotype look like? But really getting to know that sensory profile as well, if that's something that you've found really contributes to your feelings of overwhelm and has really influenced the way you've used food to help with that overwhelm. But also navigating those co-occurring mental health experiences. So neurodiverse folk are at high risk of experiencing other mental health challenges. And so sometimes, teasing that apart and figuring out ways to, manage anxiety that is in a neuro-affirming way is actually really important. And then finding those coping strategies. A lot of the typical coping strategies I think used in psychology aren't necessarily geared towards neurodiverse people. And I think if we go back to what I was talking about with some of that interoception and alexithymia, typical approaches, if we, explore what emotions are you experiencing and what thoughts are you having certain events, for autistic and ADHD people, that can be really tricky to look inwards and go, oh, I was experiencing this emotion, or I was experiencing that thought, because that is a little bit more challenging. So working with a neuro-affirming therapist can actually be really beneficial, because it's, it can provide you with that additional way of finding some of those coping strategies that are going to be a little bit more beneficial for you, that might not be mostly geared towards neurotypical folk. So yeah, I think that is the end of my presentation. What I'll do now is I'll just share that document I was talking about. All right, and Glenna, can I get a thumbs up that you can see this okay? Awesome. So this is a document, it's the mind and body check-in. And I've got up there, feeling a little off, but you're not sure why. This can be a good guide to use to sort of explore what's going on in your body. So, this might be first exploring some of those physical needs. So are you actually hungry? Thinking about, when was the last time you ate? Are there physical signs that you haven't eaten for a while? Could it be thirst, fatigue? Is your body temperature too hot or too cold? Or is there certain pain or tension points in your body? exploring that sensory check-in. So is, again, thinking about that overstimulation. Has there been too much going on for you and you now just need a bit of downtime? Or maybe you're feeling a little bit restless and you need some stimulation. So this could be using some fidget or movements as a way to get that stimulation. Thinking about those clothing. If you've got clothing sensitivities, that could be sending your body into a bit of overwhelm. And then there is a bit of thought and emotion exploration you can do. So if you can identify some of those emotions that are going on for you, learning how to recognize and name some of those emotions, thinking about your thought process. Are you overthinking or sort of getting stuck in a bit of a thought pattern? And we can try some grounding techniques to help, I guess, divert your attention to more of your body rather than your thoughts. And then also we have, environmental and social needs. So thinking about, if you need to get outside, if you need to engage in some of that social interaction. Um, yeah, it's sort of going through and trying to figure out what's going on for you in your body before, I guess, making that movement towards food. If that's something that if you're struggling with some of that emotional eating, this might be a way to go, okay, I am experiencing something. I'm just not too sure what it is. This can provide a bit of a visual guide to sort of walk you through some different areas of your body to help explore that. So we're going to unshare.
And guys, are you ready for a little bit of a Q&A? Tom, are you wrapped up your bit?
I am indeed. That's why I'm drinking a lot of water.
Yes, you've been talking a lot. Thank you so much for that. You can see there's some comments in here as we're going saying that was a really informative presentation, and I was dividing my time between talking in the chat box and also just writing some notes, as I always do, as I always learn from Dr. Tom when he presents. Okay, so there's a few really good questions. And Tom, while I'm just answering one, you might have a little look at Deborah's, Melissa's, and Suzanne's questions. I don't know, some of them might be delving into therapy areas a little bit too much, but maybe Tom has some general ideas on those. So we'll be guided by you on that, Tom. While you're doing that, I have a question that I'm like, oh, I think I can answer that one. So I will pull it up here. Where is it? Okay, so Kayleen said, Glenn, I've read your Thinsanity book and I've engaged with a number of your free resources a few years ago. What's the difference with Tom's work? So, really, really good question. And I think my first response is there's probably two differences. Um, One is that Tom, we're not allowed to say with our regulatory body that anybody is an expert, but Tom has a real special interest and a lot of experience in supporting neurodivergent people. So I think that is a really big difference. So you'll be getting all of the ideas that we talk about in Thinsanity. Tom is really up with the non-diet approach and everything we cover in there, and really working what I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but it would be helping you to apply those principles with a special acknowledgement and understanding of the way that your unique brain works. And speaking very frankly, that is a part that I am learning about, I'm very interested in, but I just can't do as well as Tom. Um, and a good example of that is I've been I've been sharing a few of my clients with Tom, or subcontracting the neurodivergent support out to Tom. And one of my clients who we're sharing, and I haven't actually shared this with you, Tom, and obviously we won't mention any names, but just said, I said, how is it going? Starting to explore the way your particular neurodivergent brain works with how you're going to transcend these eating, exercise, weight, body image challenges. And she said, look, I actually have finished my session with Tom and thinking, there's finally an answer. Because she's neurodivergent, and typically, and this is what we're trying to do, is trying to be at the forefront of understanding the connection between neurodiversity and these concerns. So that would be the first thing. And the second thing is just having someone to walk the journey with you. You know, there is a definite difference between having a little light bulb moment or having a tiny bit of self-awareness or an insight, and then doing what I call turning that information into transformation. So Tom has given some wonderful ideas, and we wanted to sort of include a lot of value tonight. And we're hopeful that you will, be able to take something and have a play around with it, and have it to help you with whatever concerns, whether it's eating, movement, weight, body image, or just general, feeling better psychologically. Because Tom does a lot of general psychology as well. But also, my guess is that sort of Tom has laid out some of the key things that he works on, but would be super happy to support anybody just to implement it. So like I do with my book, I have people that might have read my book, they've gotten some benefit out of it, but then we might spend 10 or 20 sessions really turning that information into transformation. And Mr. Nick, I might even ask you at this point, if you don't mind, to put up our snazzy neurodiversity assessment and support page. So for anybody who's interested, I think that is a real value in the support that Tom offers. Just an understanding of somebody who has these concerns with their food or movement or weight or health or body image, and understands and can help you to understand and work with the way that your unique brain works. Tom's too modest to promote himself, but I'll promote him. Our clients love him, like I said, and he would love to support you. And also, something that we've just got going, of course, is his assessments, which are really, really cool. It's to talk very briefly, because I will hand you over to Tom about the assessments. It's a really powerful way to understand very clearly the way your brain works. And that can then inform the process of how you then will support yourself with these eating, weight, body image concerns, but also just with your whole life. And we really want to do this as a service to the community. So a couple of things that we've really focused on is, one, having them available. You don't have to wait 3 months to get an assessment done. Two, we wanted to make them very affordable. So if you look at them, they're not cheap, speaking frankly, but we really made an effort to make them very as affordable as we possibly can. And if you look at them, probably compared to a lot of what's out there, they're quite affordable. And the other thing that we do, it is just a general neurodiversity, ADHD, autism assessment. But because a lot of our clients have eating concerns, there is just a little extra focus in that assessment on how that relates to your eating concerns. So I hope that answers your question, Kayleen. And Tom, I might leave you, because I'm sure people want to hear you more than they want to hear me, to pick and choose from those other questions and see which ones you're happy to give an answer to.
Yeah, sure. I was going to reply in text to a couple of them, but then I thought I might just open it up verbally. So I guess, yeah, Deborah had the question about interoception and toileting. Yeah, that is a very common sort of experience. A lot of neurodiverse kids often struggle to even register the body cues for toileting. But I would always, put a caveat to that and say, if it's the constipation that's the issue, obviously exploring dietary, concerns and whether there might be digestive concerns there as well. So starting with the medical exploration, but if it is more of a refute or a sort of a not knowing when to go to the bathroom, that can be an interoceptive thing as well. I hope that answered your question. There was a question there about sensory preferences for food like Coke, pizza, and chocolate for a young child. Pizza every night felt safe. Yeah, and I'm assuming is the pizza sort of a packaged pizza? Suzanne, if you don't mind saying, because I guess yeah, for a lot of kids or even adults, having those pre-made meals, so like packaged pizza, that it's always consistent, that can be a very comforting and safe thing because there's no variation. It's always going to be the same. So that can be a bit of a sensory thing, but also just that preference for routine, knowing that the food's going to be the same as you had it last night. So that can definitely be, yeah, a preference thing as well. The bento boxes I have, yeah, those can also be quite useful too because they're also, they're smaller portions. So for a lot of ADHD is if portion control and inhibiting sort of, once the eating starts and then not knowing when to finish, those bento boxes can be good, because they might separate the food. So if you do have food sensory preferences, the food's already separated, but it can also be a good novelty thing too, because there's different varieties of food. So the bento boxes are actually pretty cool because they can keep things really interesting, and they're sort of almost ready to go in terms of portion size. So that's, yeah, a lot of people have sort of said the bento boxes are good. Anna had a question about screening for neurodivergence. There are screening tools available online. I would always sort of, I guess, caution against, I think a lot of them sometimes they're not ideal. Really, for the proper screening ones, they, when we do screen for neurodivergence, the screening tools we use have been very heavily tested, and so they are very, I guess, scrutinized in the validity of them and all of that. So it does depend on where you find, if there are free ones online that you do find it, you can definitely do them and just explore it. But yeah, it's always a tricky one if you just find a random questionnaire online that, asks you about, what animal do you think you are and that sort of thing. So it's always, yeah, looking for screening tools online can be hit and miss, but it's about if you gather enough information and you think this resonates with you, and you're sort of seeing a lot of these things, it could be, I guess, worth exploring. Yeah. There's also, I think there's a lot of people who are neurotypical don't often question if they're neurotypical. And so if there's a lot of these things that are resonating with you and you're going, oh, wow, this is sort of making a lot of sense and it's explaining a lot, there could be, yeah, your profile might be sort of fitting some of these descriptions. Kylie has a question there about cognitive behavior therapy and how it might work, help somebody who's ADHD. Yeah, so cognitive, and this is sort of touching on what I was talking about at the end there, that with cognitive behavior therapy, the traditional model is really exploring, helping somebody identify when behavior X occurs, I have these thoughts, I then have these emotions, and I engage in these behaviors. So it is a bit of a sort of a formulaic approach. Sometimes CBT doesn't work for a lot of neurodiverse folk because it does rely heavily on almost that interoception and identifying of those emotions. And if that's something that you struggle with identifying those emotions, it can often be quite challenging to go, well, I don't know the CBT model because I can't identify what emotion's going on for me. It can be useful if you do have good insight and you can sort of see those patterns and thoughts and emotions. and also behaviors. It sort of depends on your way of thinking and your way of piecing together the bits of information. Yeah, so and even in my approach, I would use CBT, but I'd always explore, is this working for you? And if it's not, then I'd use something else. Fiona, do I train for practitioners in other disciplines? I don't at the moment. Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about doing, but at the moment I'm just sort of I'm deep in the clinician realm of things and enjoying the therapy at the moment. So yeah. Oh, Hilary, good question. The mental health care plans. Yeah, so for general therapy, yes, mental health care plans. For assessments, mental health care plans don't provide any rebate for assessments. There is one exception to that. So there is a Medicare referral pathway, but it's only for people under the age of 25, and they need to have a referral from a psychiatrist or a pediatrician. And you can get rebates if you get that type of referral, but it only applies to the in-person sessions, so the actual assessments, so not the report writing. Yeah, and you do require that referral first. So sometimes, depending on how expensive the psychiatrist is, you may not necessarily save enough money to pay off the psychiatrist session with the rebated money. So it's something to have a look into. But again, it's only for people under 25. If you do want more information about that, if you are under 25, I can't see, but just let me know and I can send that through if that's useful. Um, oh, there's a comment there about, I guess, yeah, a sluggish gut and hypermobility. Yeah, in the neurodivergence context, there is a lot of overlap between gut issues and hypermobility. So I always get the pronunciation wrong, but Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is very common in autistic folk, as well as gut issues. So that's also something to keep in mind in the context of eating, because if we think about hyper sort of flexibility and mobility, there might be difficulties with utensils. So that might be a thing, but then also gut issues might create some aversion towards food. So naturally, somebody might not want to eat particular things if they know their gut's not going to respond well to it. Percentage of people that I see that might be ADHD, but after an assessment find out they are not. Yeah, it's not many, to be honest, because again, I think if people are coming for an autism or ADHD assessment, they've usually recognized that something is going on and they want to explore what that is. And they've recognized that they've had these challenges and this might explain what's going on. So more often than not, people who are seeking an assessment for ADHD or autism are neurodivergent. But I would never say that's always the case. There will be some exceptions, but in my instance, it's usually more often than not.
And guys, I'm just mindful of the time. So Tom, you
Mm.
interrupt me if there's anything that you really want to jump on. But we've just kind of taken ourselves past the hour. And look, there are a few sort of questions that to me seem to be sort of going into that like clinical realm that would be really suited to one-on-one therapy. Um, so just a reminder, Mr. Nick has linked our little info sheet. Nick is our digital marketing wizard. So this is a sheet that Tom and Nick and I put together, and we think it really explains the offerings really, really well. But if you do have any more questions or you want to book in for an assessment or just some ongoing support with Tom, we've got our number there on that page. and a little contact form. And we have been sort of promoting Tom's assessments recently. So Tom's availability is becoming more limited week by week. But the girls in the office are really well conditioned now at getting your phone calls and getting back to you. They'll get back to you the next day, or answering your little contact info form, where you can really provide as much information as you want or as little. And then if you have any remaining questions, we definitely want to help you understand everything you need to know and look at the best way of supporting you. So guys, we have had a big session tonight, and I want to thank Dr. Tom for sharing his wisdom and a bit of his loveliness with us here tonight, and definitely want to thank all of you for coming and attending. And I think that really all of the chat that our live participants give really does bring the material to life for everyone else who watches after. So thank you very much to our live participants. We're just looking forward to supporting you. Really great work, guys.
And
thanks so much.
I should also say that it's only Glenn that calls me Dr. Tom. So
Is it really? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Everyone else, you can just call him Tom.
Yeah.
I oscillate.
Yeah. No, thanks everybody for joining in. Yeah, I hope you found it useful. And yeah, reach out if you have any questions or are looking for a bit of support.
And Tom, I can tell the last thing I wanted to say is we can tell by the love in the chat box that it's been a really, really helpful session. So great work, everyone.